My name is Christina, and today is my first day seeing a psychologist. I've always been a troubled kid, but I've never actually needed to see someone to justify that. Well, not until now. A few weeks back, something happened. Even now, it's hard for me to think about it, even though I know I will have to. I can't just pretend everything is fine. I was at a house party with a couple of my friends. Tom and Alice were taking shots by my side as I watched on, a little worried. Admittedly, the two of them often overdid the drinking, so I usually stayed sober to make sure they'd be okay. Instead of drinking, you should try lucid dreaming. Alice cackled as she threw back another shot, tossing her head back as well. I gagged at the sight of pure alcohol coming from her. It wasn't long until she vomited and regretted all of her life choices. As her best friend, it was my duty to take care of her. She'd always said she would do the same for me one day, but that day, I shake my head, trying not to feel too much anger for my friend. She was drunk after all. Lucid dreaming? I asked, because really, I wanted to at least sound cool. Only, I had no idea what this lucid dreaming thing was. Yeah, you try to sleep on your back and meditate or whatever. It's like getting high. Apparently you can fly and stuff when you sleep like that. Control your movements, eat, whatever. For how drunk she was. Alice explained the concept well enough, and then barfed the last few shots out into the trash can before going in for another. You should just sleep here, Cindy, the host said, laying a hand on my shoulder. I stepped away, while she managed to walk in a straight line. She was clearly wasted as well. But she was right. I didn't feel very comfortable driving a puking Alice and Tom who was probably up to no good. Crashing on a bed and going back home the next morning sounded like a much better idea. And so, with the music still echoing off the walls, I curled up in Cindy's bed, only to be reminded of lucid dreaming again. I've never gotten high and part of me wanted to at least try. What could go wrong, right? I grabbed my phone and did some research. I shouldn't have done that, but minutes later, I was listening to an audio that was sure to help me lucid dream. As the reliable friend, I wanted to just do something crazy for once. I should have just had a couple shots. See, as I listened to the crooning male voice coax me to relax, I became hyper-aware of my body. It felt weird, forcing myself to keep still, to stop wiggling my toes, to make my fingers stop clutching the blanket over me. Finally, it started. I felt as if I was anchored to the bed. The man from the audio said it was okay. All I needed was to push myself off, to take flight. But I couldn't. I tried to wiggle my toes at first, but they refused to move. My neck, too, felt as if it had glued to the cushion. The music still continued, as loud as ever. With the audio stopping, I could hear it again. But I couldn't react to it. I was paralyzed. I'd never heard of anything like this happening. But then again, I rarely dreamt. So, being in such a state was fascinating at first. I was hyper-aware of everything going on around me. The heat of my blanket covering me, the noises, the way my chest rose and fell. My eyes, they were stuck open too, although all I could see was the ceiling. I tried to push myself away, once again, but nothing happened. And then, I heard it. A scream. Alice! Alice! I wanted to shout, knowing it was her, but my throat felt like it was stuffed with cotton. Breathing became a chore as I realized just how dry my mouth was, as if it was stuck open too. Maybe it was, but there was nothing I could do about it. Alice barged into the room, nearly tearing the door off the hinges. She She wasn't herself. I knew that, but still.
What the? Did you really do it? Huh. Look at the loser. Christina, can you move?
I tried my hardest to nod, fearing the person I had thought to be my friend, but nothing happened.
Gosh, look at you. Too smart for drugs, so you decided to get high in a different way. Huh. I've always wanted this. To see you motionless.
This is not Alice, I thought to myself. But the way she leaned over me, her face obstructing my sight, made it hard to believe it wasn't Alice's perfectly manicured nails. And they seemed much longer, like claws, as she dragged them down the wall, creating deep scratches. The sound pierced my ears. It was like chalk against a chalkboard. I shuddered as those very nails wrapped around my face. But suddenly, the figure above me wasn't Alice anymore. Her features seemed to contort into something strange, inhumane almost. Makeup melted off her face, blending in with her skin until all that was left on her face was just black and nothing else. Her laughter, though, kept ringing in my ears. I felt pressure on my chest as if she was pushing down, and then I realized No, the creature was sitting on me. I'm going to suffocate, I thought, panic coursing through my entire body. Normally, this should have been enough. I was sure, for someone to snap out of this nightmare, but it wasn't for me. Alice cackled, showing teeth that I knew did not belong to her. They were yellow and disgusting, dripping with blood. The monster. No, Alice. No, the monster. It was going to bite me. I was sure of that, but I just couldn't move. My voice was still lost, but I struggled to at least scream, but all I managed was a quiet whine. And no help came. Alice, please, don't do this. I begged her in my mind.
You always spoil my fun, Christina. Why do you even come with us if you don't like partying? Such a spoiled sport. You know what we do with people like you?
Her voice was sweet like honey, but I felt nails press into my throat. I maniacally started to move again. I needed to at least roll away before I would get cut. We drowned them. Water. Suddenly, I couldn't breathe. I couldn't even see anything, but it felt like water was enveloping my head from all sides. It burnt at my eyes, snuck into my nose, gurgled down my throat. I felt as if nothing but water existed around me. And then, I woke up. But when I did, I was the one with fingers around someone's throat. Alice leaned over me, shot clear on her face. My grip tightened. I could move, but I was reluctant to peel them off, even as her face started to turn blue, as tears gathered in her eyes, as she stopped breathing. At first, I watched her go limp, fall, stiff from my hold on the wooden floor, head crashing painfully against the nightstand. I was certain I was still dreaming, paralyzed, so I pinched myself. My nails had little bits of skin stuck underneath them. The pinch hurt. Crap, Alice. It was too late. She was bleeding too much and too quickly. It must have been the cut on her head that killed her. But the marks around her neck were on display too. No matter how hard I tried to scrub them off before the door opened again. It was Tom, with 2 glasses of water. He was the one who called the police on me. The next day or so was a blur. Well, all these weeks had been, really. Alice was killed. By me. Apparently she'd gone upstairs to check on me, to make sure I was all right, because she had heard me screaming. And I killed her. I begged the policeman to understand that I had been paralyzed, that something else was controlling me. But why would anyone believe me? The ratty nerd who always envied her darling popular friend. The girl who never dared to do much but watch her friends have fun. So, here I am now, locked up, ready for my first time in therapy. In jail. Apparently, what had happened could still be ruled an accident. I could be freed after a few years. But what if history will repeat itself? Ever since then, I only sleep when I collapse out of exhaustion. I try to keep my mind busy, hoping that I never fall into that weird, possessed paralysis thing again. But it's getting harder and harder. I fear that one night I will fall asleep early, and I'll hurt someone again. Or hurt myself. Who knows? Anything can happen in that twisted state.
Hey guys, I see many of you commenting on my videos that this channel deserves 1 million subscribers. But I also see the percent of people who watch my videos aren't actually subscribed to the channel. So, if you like the content, want to support my channel, and want to see this channel reach 1 million subscribers, or maybe 500,000 subscribers, then go ahead, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. It's free, and you can always change your mind later.
I recently saw an article that read, 80% of people on this earth love to sleep. And while I can't argue with this fact, I've realized that in the past 2 years, I'm not part of the 80%. Because unlike most people, I dread the time when I'm supposed to sleep. And this ghastly experience will tell you why. My name is Axel Cooper, and every night for the past 2 years, I've suffered from a really peculiar case of sleep paralysis. It started around the month of June, back in 2015. I had recently got back from a trip, and since I was tired, I immediately went to bed. I'm guessing it took around 5 minutes before the morbid experience began. I was in a very lucid dream-like state. I tried to move my arms and legs, but I couldn't. I was about to panic when out of the corner of my eye, I could see a very terrifying creature. A huge black gutter rat was on my bed, and before I could say anything, it was joined by numerous other gutter rats. There were about 20 to be exact. Terrified, I began to ask myself how they had gotten inside the house. As I opened my mouth to call out to my wife, nothing but silence came out of my mouth, as it horrifically dawned on me that I couldn't speak. Within 5 seconds, the real horror began, as the gutter rats all rushed at me baring their teeth. There are no words to explain the immeasurable pain and agony that I felt when they began to sink their teeth into my skin. They ate me alive slowly, and no matter how much I screamed, all I heard was the sound of my own tearing flesh. It didn't take long before I began to feel myself dying, and as I was about to take my last breath, I woke up screaming and drenched in sweat. My wife immediately woke up as the gut-churning scream rang through the entire house. I began to hear footsteps down the hall as my 2 children, Matt and Lisa, rushed into the room. My whole family surrounded me as they began to ask me what was wrong. I told them that I just had a bad dream and it was nothing to be worried about. My wife Mary didn't look too convinced as she asked me, "Are you sure that's what it was? Because you look really terrified, Axel." I assured her that it was, before apologizing for waking her and the kids. I put the kids back to bed, and I felt scared to go back to mine as I didn't want to have the same dream again. I didn't sleep that night, as I stayed up all night trying to forget the vivid dream. The next day I told myself that it was just a bad dream and I shouldn't think of it too much. But in the coming nights, I realized that I was wrong.
as the bad dreams kept happening every single night after that, and each one was worse than the last. Every night for the past 2 years, I can assure you that I've experienced almost every single horrific way of dying. From being stabbed numerous times by little demon children, all the way to being burned to death. Every new night, there's always something different, and I can never do anything to stop it or help myself. As my muscles always became flaccid during the horrific dreams. I had to move out of my bedroom and sleep in the garage, as the screams were becoming unbearable for my wife and children. No matter how much I tried, it never stopped. I even tried avoiding sleep for some days, but that never lasted as long as my body would always get the best of me. Night after night, I would wake up screaming and drenched in sweat. My wife began to spend a lot of money taking me to numerous doctors and specialists, who all coined the experience as sleep paralysis. She bought numerous pills and took me for numerous sessions, but I told her to stop as I knew it wasn't going to work. As deep down, I knew the exact reason why I was going through this hellish experience every night, because I myself chose to do so. To understand what I just said, I need to take you back exactly 2 years ago before this all began. I had just been diagnosed with a terminal disease, and all the doctors I went to see told me that there was no hope as my life would soon be over. I didn't tell my wife about this as I didn't want her to worry, so I kept it to myself. The fear of leaving her and my children alone was terrifying, so I decided to do anything in my power to fix it. Since medicine and science had failed me, I decided to seek spiritual help, so I traveled abroad to seek a spiritual healer. When I arrived at the place, I was ushered into a hut. I walked in to see a hooded woman sitting on the floor, mumbling what I assumed were incantations. I sat down next to her, and I began to explain everything to her. When I was done, she told me that she can fix me, as she was sure that she had the solution to my problem. She then told me that nothing in this world is free, and I would have to pay a very steep price for it. I immediately agreed as I said to her, "Anything to stay alive." She then gave me a foul concoction to drink. I had never tasted anything more revolting in my life, but I still drank every drop of it. When I was done, the hooded woman then looked over at me and said,
You have just drunk the remains of a dead fetus. This was done to give you the fresh stench of death. Through this, you will be spared from dying. But every night for the rest of your life, you will lay with death as compensation for her sparing your life.
I was completely shocked and confused at what I had just heard, as I really didn't know what to make of it. The hooded woman then began to come really close to me, and as the sight of her face became visible, I nearly screamed in horror, as I could see that she had no eyes, and only dark gaping holes filled her eye sockets. The feeling of regret began to creep up, as I felt that I had just gotten myself into something really messed up. But I knew that it was too late to go back now. So even though I was shocked and scared by what I had just seen and heard, I strengthened my resolve as I knew that it was my only hope. After the strange meeting, I quickly went to the airport and made my way home. When I got back from the trip, I immediately visited numerous doctors to get a new diagnosis. And after running some tests, to their disbelief, they all shockingly told me that I had been miraculously cured. Now, even after 2 years of gruesome nights, I'm still pulling through it all. Even though the burden that I'm carrying is maddening, even though this isn't the life that I wanted to live, I know that if I was given the same opportunity,
I would do it again and choose life. Everything has a price in this world. While I'm stuck in an infinite loop of one-night stands with death herself, I take solace in the fact that when it's over, I know that I'll be able to see tomorrow with my beautiful family. And that, to me, that's 1,000,000 times worth the steep price. My father died when I was 6. My mother couldn't really support us on her own, so she rushed to get remarried after his death. The man she married and who eventually became my stepfather was an abusive alcoholic who regularly beat me whenever he thought I was out of line. He also did a lot of other things to me that I'd rather not remember, but since he was the one paying the bills and keeping food on the table, my mother pretended to not notice any of it. Not long after my mother remarried, my stepfather had us move out of our old house to one he bought in another town. I had to leave my old life behind. My friends, my school, and everything that reminded me of my birth father disappeared from my life the day we moved. I was truly alone from then on, left to deal with my stepfather's abuse with no one to turn to. The only bright side to the whole thing was that the new house was much bigger than our old one. I got my own bedroom, though it was a little worse for wear when we first got there. There were cobwebs on every corner, and a layer of dust covered everything from the shelves to the rickety old bed I was supposed to sleep in. Of course, I was expected to clean it by myself, and that's what I did during my entire first day there. I swept and mopped the entire place myself, though I did miss a few spots on account of being a short 7-year-old who couldn't reach the top shelves. I didn't want to bother my mother or stepfather about it though. I was afraid that my stepfather would see it as me being lazy and use it as an excuse to beat me again. So I decided that I just had to learn to live with a couple of cobwebs. I ended up finding something strange while cleaning my room. The bed frame, which was there before we bought the house, had long scratch marks on the sides. It was a bit creepy, but I assumed that they were cat scratches left by the last occupant's pet. Later that night, as I was trying to sleep, I experienced my first ever case of sleep paralysis. I was laying on my sore and bruised back after being beaten by my stepfather earlier that day. I forgot why he did it, but it left me with a black eye afterwards. He tended to use any excuse he could find as an opportunity to pull out his belt. Just as I felt my mind drifting off to sleep from exhaustion, a sudden chill ran down my spine, and my eyes fluttered wide open while the rest of me was frozen in place. I could see my dusty ceiling and move my eyes around the room, but I couldn't move a muscle in my body. It was like every fiber of my being was being weighed down by some invisible force. The sensation was new to me, but I didn't panic. There were times when my stepfather beat me so badly that I'd crumple up on the floor unable to move for hours on end. And this didn't feel all too different from that. I was just glad that I wasn't in immense physical pain that usually came with me being unable to move. I finally fell asleep at some point in the night, though I can't remember when. I woke up to the sound of my stepfather shouting for me to get down for breakfast the next morning. He told me over breakfast with my mother that I couldn't be starting school for a while. At the time, I thought he was just being unusually nice to me by giving me some extra time to adjust to the new environment. Looking back, I think he just wanted to wait until the black eye he gave me healed before letting me go out. Later that night, I had sleep paralysis again. I froze in bed, unable to move, but this time I could also hear something coming from under my bed. It was the sound that someone would make while grinding their teeth together to chew a piece of hard candy. A bit weird, but I slept through worse. There were nights when my stepfather would argue loudly with my mother in the next room while drunk, and I always managed to sleep through that, so some weird noises under my bed was nothing. My stepfather hurt me again the next day. He didn't even bother to come up with a reasonable excuse that time. He came home in a bad mood because of something that happened at work. I was on the living room couch watching TV when he grabbed me by the shirt and threw me on the floor. "Lazy kids like you who do nothing all day just piss me off." He kicked me while I was down a few times before removing his belt. He folded the leather belt in half and began whipping me in the face with it. One of his lashes was so hard that it made a cut right over the black eye he gave me. My mother was in the kitchen, just one room over during the entire thing. I was sure she could hear him shouting at me, but like always, she did nothing to stop him. I went to bed with a new scar on my forehead that night. Minutes after I settled under my blankets, I felt my body freeze again, just like it had the previous nights. I'd already gotten used to the feeling, so I didn't think much of it, not even when I started hearing the grinding sound come from under my bed. I almost didn't notice the claw gripping the side of my bed frame before the monster under my bed pulled himself up. The monster who crawled up onto my bed was tall and spindly, with gray ashen skin and a bulbous head, like a stick figure that came to life. He perched himself on my chest with feet that looked like talons of a large bird. He was heavy, though not as heavy as I would have thought. The monster leaned forward, allowing me to clearly see his face despite the darkness. He had red eyes as large as an owl, and a fang-filled mouth that was too big for his face. His breath smelled bad, like rotten meat. But then again, so did my stepfather's after a night of drinking, and at least he wasn't shouting at me. As far as I'm concerned, that monster was the only person in my life who didn't ignore me like my father, or beat me like my stepfather. And if he ate me like monsters were supposed to, then at least I'd finally be able to rest. But he didn't do that. He just sat on my chest and stared at me. He made some grinding noises with his teeth again, but that was about it. At last, he tilted his head to one side in what I thought must have been curiosity. I guess he wasn't used to meeting children who weren't scared of him. I felt bad for him when I realized that it must have been hard living under a bed with everyone too scared to be his friend. I eventually fell asleep with him sitting on my chest. When I woke up that morning, I rushed to the kitchen. My mother was in the garden, while my stepfather was still sleeping off his hangover from the previous night's drinking. I snuck out some cookies from the cookie jar and put it on a plate before rushing to my bedroom. When I got there, I tore a page out from my old school notebook and wrote, "To Mr. Boogeyman" on it. I put the note under my bed with a plate of cookies on top of them, hoping that the boogeyman from the night before would enjoy them. Before I went to bed that night, I looked under my bed and was happy to see an empty plate with the cookies and a note nowhere in sight. I had sleep paralysis again as I tried to sleep, and the boogeyman rose from under my bed, just like he did the night before. But he seemed a lot friendlier this time around. He didn't just sit on my chest or put his face to me or anything. He just sat on my bedside looking at me. Sometimes he'd rub my head with his long fingers, the same way my real dad used to when he was alive. At one point, he even picked up my teddy bear to play with it. It looked so surreal that I wanted to laugh, but the sleep paralysis kept me from moving anything but my eyes. This went on for the next few days. I'd sneak a snack under my bed for Mr. Boogeyman, and he'd keep me company during the night as I fell asleep. Then one night, I made a mistake. I accidentally took one of my stepfather's beer cans from the fridge, thinking it was a soda to give to Mr. Boogeyman. That night, before I could even settle into bed, my stepfather barged into my bedroom. "You little bitch! Steal from me, would you?" Before I could even finish my sentence, he slapped me across the face with the back of his hand. I fell onto the bed and covered my head with my arms as my stepfather whipped my back over and over again with his folded leather belt. I heard him undo a zipper right before the sound of grinding teeth filled the air. I opened my eyes and saw my stepfather standing by my bed with a confused look on his face. Who's there? He bent down to look under my bed. The moment he did, spindly gray arms shot out from the darkness and grabbed him by the throat. He tried to scream, but no air could escape his lungs as he was dragged kicking and flailing under my bed. When morning came, my mother found me crying under the blankets and my stepfather's corpse under the bed. The police who were called in determined the cause of death to be a heart attack caused by extreme fear. My mother was deemed unfit to raise me, and I was sent into foster care. I'm in a much better place now with a healthy family that cares for me. But sometimes, as I lay awake in bed at night, I can't help but wonder how Mr. Boogeyman, my only friend in those dark times, I wonder how he's doing.